In January, I started capturing each day of my life in one small square of a drawing calendar. Back then, I was looking for moments worth drawing. But in February, I had the opposite problem. This month, we spent 5 weeks in Thailand, traveling, working remotely, and often squeezing a little too much into each day. And suddenly, everything felt worth capturing, and deciding what to leave out became the new creative challenge of this project. Hi, I'm Julia, and this is the second month of me drawing my life in the calendar I made to bring more art into my routine. February ended up testing this idea in a completely different way. There was more movement, more impressions, more time spent out in the world. And 1 square a day started to feel very small. In January, I was learning how to notice more in ordinary days. An interesting task at work, a delicious meal, a familiar walk in the park. Something that could hold the feeling of that day. But in Thailand, everything shifted. The days felt packed from the start, partly because everything around me was still new. I had a few days off at the beginning, and they were intense, because so much was happening. Even on work days, there was usually something outside the routine. A new street, a place to eat, some small detail I wanted to remember. Because the people I work with were on the opposite side of the world, my workday shifted later. So I often had the mornings free to go out and collect impressions before work even started. So the question at the start of my drawing session changed too. It was no longer, what should I draw today? It became, what do I leave out? Because most days didn't just give me 1 or 2 moments. They gave me many. Of course, not every day in February was equally packed. There were 3 distinct periods when that feeling became strongest, and I think they shaped the feeling of the whole month. The first and most saturated was our 4-day trip to Bangkok in the second week of February, around my birthday. It was my first time there, and everything felt intense in the best way. The scale of the city, the movement, the constant flow of impressions throughout the day. My birthday itself probably felt like the most saturated day of the month. The strongest image from it was having drinks high above the city, on the 76th floor, with Bangkok stretching out below us. At that point, I didn't even try to fit anything else into that square, and drew only this rooftop moment, because it felt like the strongest one to keep. Bangkok was the first time I really felt both sides of the challenge, choosing what to leave out and also simply finding the time to draw at all. But more on that later. The second peak came the following weekend, when we went to an excursion in the Takua Thung district. And that day was completely different, but just as full. Dramatic cliffs, sea caves, monkeys eating cucumbers, and one beautiful landscape after another. From all that variety, I choose to capture the most iconic cliff in the area and a baby monkey chewing on a cucumber. And the third visually overwhelming peak came on the last weekend of the month, at Cheow Lan Lake in Khao Sok National Park. We took a boat ride at sunset with breathtaking views. The whole weekend felt like one long immersion in nature and its beauty. Luckily, the February calendar grid had one extra empty space after that Saturday, the last day of the month. I used it to stretch that day's impressions across 2 squares. And Sunday was already March the 1st. So the rest of that weekend belongs to the next chapter of the story. Almost as soon as I arrived in Thailand, it became obvious that the experiences were getting much bigger than the square could hold. So I had to simplify more aggressively and leave out things that would normally stand out on an ordinary day at home. The February squares leaned much more toward the outside world. There were more places, more going out, more architecture, objects, and more details tied to where I was. The drawings became less about summarizing the day and more about choosing its strongest visual anchor, something that could stand out from everything else around it. A beach view, a boat ride, a beautiful temple. But of course, there were still some work-related moments too, along with a lot of gastronomical impressions from different places to eat. And of course, the legendary 7-Eleven. Since I was out in the world more, I kept stumbling upon little keepsakes that could add to my drawings in the calendar. I like how they visually support the drawings and soften them a little. The Air China logo from the airline's sickness bag. A sticker from a local coffee shop. Pieces of tickets from our Cheow Lan Lake trip. They feel like small physical traces of the day that help hold on to the memory in a different way. Another thing that changed in February was how much time passed between leaving a day and drawing it. In January, the rhythm felt more immediate. I usually drew the day either on the same day or at most a couple of days later. In Thailand, I feel like it was almost never the same day. Usually, there was a gap of a couple of days between the experience and the moment I drew it. By then, I was relying more on memory, on photos, on the little keepsakes I had collected in my bag, and on whatever impressions I had stayed with me most clearly. And interestingly, that didn't make the drawings feel weaker. It kind of made them more distilled. And let's return to my favorite example, the trip to Bangkok. There, I wasn't always sure when I would even have time to sit down and draw. There was one more complication I had to think about. From Phuket to Bangkok, we were traveling with carry-on luggage only, so I couldn't bring my scissors for cutting stickers and keepsakes. Because of that, I pre-cut a few stickers before we left that I thought I would probably use in those Bangkok squares, based on our plans. But I also collected a few stickers during the trip and wanted to use them too. Our hotel reception didn't have any scissors, so I just went to the nearest 7-Eleven across the road and asked the cashier if I could use the scissors from the counter. I was definitely looking like an absolute weirdo, standing there cutting little pieces of paper. But it helped me stick to my drawing plan. And that's the most important thing, right? Eventually, I managed to draw twice during those 4 days. And honestly, I consider that a success, given how hectic that trip felt. Some impressions from my trip to Thailand definitely needed more space than a calendar square could give them, because some days left me with images, details, and keepsakes that I wanted to capture in a bigger format. That was where my sketchbook came in. Some of those especially full days didn't really end inside the calendar. They spilled into larger drawings. either in the moment or a little later. I had also collected bigger keepsakes I wanted to keep, along with flowers, which I love drying and saving as a way of holding on to memories too. They felt too fragile for the calendar and would probably get crushed there. So the sketchbook became a more natural place for some of those impressions to continue. I still drew in the sketchbook less than I wanted to, which is honestly a familiar feeling. But I still managed to fill over 10 spreads. And I think February made something even clearer to me. The calendar wasn't replacing the sketchbook. It was constantly pointing me back to it. Capturing this February taught me that a habit doesn't need perfect conditions to keep working. And actually, conditions are never perfect. There is never a perfect time to start. And there is never a month that stays still long enough to make things easy. Something is always changing, always happening in our lives. The only way to make a habit work is to make it realistic enough to maintain, small enough to return to, flexible enough to adapt when life changes shape. And that's what this month taught me through this drawing practice: how to keep showing up in a way that feels manageable, even when life itself feels especially full. So this was the second month of my drawing calendar. I'm really curious to see how the next months will turn out and what lessons they will bring. If you would like to try the calendar, you can download it for free from the description of this video. And also recently, I finally finished this project on my website, so you can take a closer look at the product and all the details there. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.